Hello and welcome, my friends, to the next video in the Joel series. Hopefully you guys know that I have a playlist, which I have encouraged people to watch the entirety of before tuning into the next installment of the series. And I was going to do the whole chapter of Joel 2 in one video. And then I thought, no, there's actually a concept that I want to deepen conversation on and kind of take it out of all of the rest of this stuff and address it separately. And that is the concept of blowing ye the trumpet. There are contextual necessities when we're looking at references to the trumpet, whether it's in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, depending on the context of the book, which book it's written in, what type of book it is, whether you're talking about history or you're talking about something that was applicable to the situation when it was written, or if it's talking about prophecy, if you're talking about instruments, or if you're talking about voices, there is a myriad of discussion topics. There are a myriad of discussion topics about this concept of the trumpet. And so I wanted to take this out, pull this topic out and have this discussion outside of, well, I mean, it's in Joel 2, clearly, but it's going to kind of be outside of the sequence of it's going to be outside of the sequence of the series of chapters. It's going to be a topical discussion, I guess are the words that I'm searching for right now. Part of the reason I want to do this is because I legitimately just did a video, and this is fairly recent, where we're talking about an entirely different context. We're talking about New Testament, and we're talking about 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15 and the last trump, or the trump of God, and talking about the rapture of the church. And that is 1,000% not anything that this is talking about in Joel 2. One of my subscribers made a very prescient point, and something that perhaps I've just missed, because I'm just used to the way that I do things, and I'm used to the subscribers on my channel knowing what I mean when I say the word context. And so perhaps I need to have a come to Jesus moment and talk about context. And I'm searching. Okay, I made a post about this on my post tab, and I was just trying to find it real quick. Context. Understand the meaning of the word or phrase, and understand the situationality of its usage to determine whether that same situationality can be applied across alternate occurrences of the same word. So this is what I mean is when there's a trumpet mentioned, is it in the Old Testament or the New Testament? Is it talking about an instrument, or is it talking about a voice? Is it talking about a memorial, to do this on a day in remembrance of something that happened in the past? Or is it sounding an alarm because people are about to invade and you're trying to alert? Is it gathering for assembly? Is it talking about voices? And if it's talking about voices, is it talking about the voices of angels or the voice of Jesus? And so this is what I mean when I talk about context, is when you have a reference to a trumpet, this is not one of those circumstances where you can just paint a broad brush across all contexts and say, anytime there's a trumpet mentioned, it means this. Because that is so far from the truth. So far from the truth. And I said, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, always. We don't just pick out singular words, phrases, verses, or concepts and make them mean whatever we want. They already have a meaning. And this is why only reading the Bible is not completely helpful. The command is to study. Study to show thyself approved. And so the study part of this is to understand the word or the phrase usage in the context it was written, and understand that you're going to be able to find similar context in at least 2 or 3 other places, because in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. And then also understanding the situationality of the book that you're finding it in. Is it a book of law, history? Or is it in the Psalms? Or is it in prophecy? Is it in the Old or the New Testament? And so this is the kind of the conversation that I want to have outside of technically the series of Joel, because in this chapter, we actually have a reference to trumpet twice. Sorry, make my page bigger. We have it twice, and it means something different in both occurrences. And so trying to identify a word and trying to say in all of these circumstances it means this one thing, and then trying to paint that with a broad brush in this circumstance is not going to work. And so I literally just did a video talking about the trumpet as it appears in the New Testament in 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians 15, and how that relates to the voice of Jesus. Went through like an hour-long video about that. This is not that, not even remotely close to that. The context of Joel 2 and the situationality of Joel 2 and what it's talking about is absolutely, positively got nothing to do with the same trump or trumpet or last trump or voice of the trump or whatever you're talking about in however it's talked about. In 1 Thessalonians 4 or 1 Corinthians 15, those relate to the voice of Jesus, which is identified when you take them to their parallel passages, specifically in Revelation 4:1. It's the voice of Jesus, the voice of a trumpet talking with John, said, "Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter." That's where 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15 meet in the book of Revelation, is in Revelation 4:1, where it identifies the voice of the trumpet, the last trump, the trump of God. Again, whatever phraseology across verses, across books that are used, it all relates to the voice of Jesus. And in 1 Corinthians 15, in 1 Thessalonians 4, it also throws in the phrase the voice of the archangel, because it wants you to differentiate. Paul wants you to differentiate the voice of Jesus from the voice of angels, because the angels, which are sounding the trumpet judgments, are sounding voices of judgment that they were given. They're not trumpet instruments that are related to the 7 trumpet judgments. They are voices of angels. And you learn that in Revelation 8:13. So Paul sticks a phrase in 1 Thessalonians 4 to let you know that it's Jesus' voice. The Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. It's his own voice. And so you know that it's not going to be related to any of the trumpet judgments in Revelation, because those are the voices of angels, and Jesus is not an angel, he's the voice of the archangel. So there's differentiation of language there to tell you that you're talking about the voice of Jesus, not the voice of an angel. And then when you get to Revelation, that clarification becomes absolutely necessary. So there's a lot of language around trumpets and voices. And that's what you're to understand of the rapture in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15. The last trump is simply the last time that the voice of Jesus is going to be used in the present dispensation. Last is the Greek word eskate, means terminal end. So the terminal end of this dispensation is the rapture of the church, where the voice of Jesus, the trump of God, the last trump, will be used to call to assembly. Now, what you see here in Joel 2 are 2 references to blowing trumpets. Neither of these have a dang thing to do with that. And so that's kind of why I wanted to have this discussion, is to kind of preempt anyone who might be linking anything in Joel 2 to the rapture of the church, or to a voice, or to Jesus's voice, or to an angelic voice, or anything that they might be trying to link the blowing of a trumpet to, as it's mentioned either time in Joel 2. To try to dispel any notion that anyone might have, or any attempt that anyone might make to link either of these mentions of blowing the trumpet to anything like that from the New Testament. We're going to get that out of people's minds. That is not the context of Joel 2. That is not the context of Joel on the whole. Yes, poet, and I didn't even know it. Joel was a prophet to Israel. And the circumstance hopefully, if you watched chapter 1, both parts, you know that the circumstance about this is Israel in the last of the last times, because we're going to talk about the locust army, and the locust army isn't released until trumpet 5. So this tells you that where Joel's prophecy is going to meet its culmination, its fulfillment in the end times, is going to be trumpet 5 and after. So it has not a single thing to do with the rapture of the church at all, because you're talking about a period of time that is going to be well after the rapture of the church, where Joel intervenes in world history and comes to fruition. What I want to do, and I don't want to make this video too long, but I did feel like this was absolutely a necessary conversation to have. And I want to take you guys through a word study, just a very brief one, and show you how you absolutely, positively need context to determine what the trumpet is representing in any given situation where it is used, because of all the different contexts, all the different, it could be a literal physical trumpet instrument. It could be a voice. It could be something they do as a memorial. It could be forward looking to something that relates to the voice of Jesus when he comes, because remember, the law, Psalms, and prophets foreshadow Jesus. So the situationality of the word trumpet, and I'm not going to go through all 104, but I am going to go through enough of them to show you that you absolutely cannot paint this with a broad brush. You must understand the situationality, the context of the usage, the context of the passage, which includes understanding whether it's law or Psalms or prophets, whether it's something related to past, present, or future, just to name a few, and whether it's an actual physical instrument or a voice. This is why, when we're talking about context, this is 100% why. When Heather teaches whole books in order, line by line, verse by verse, word by word, so that we establish context. One of my biggest pet peeves is when somebody will ask me, what does this verse mean? Well, did you read the chapter? Did you read the book? What can you tell me about the situation? We don't just pull out verses and cherry pick. That is part of the reason why I cannot, it's not even that I do not, it is that I cannot listen to other people who talk about Bible prophecy, because they do not do expositional studies. Once you get in the habit of doing an expositional study, you can't go back, and you cannot listen to other people who don't, because the risk of taking things out of context is much, much greater when people do not do expositional studies. They do not study whole books and whole chapters in order, line by line, word by word, verse by verse. I'm not saying that my way is the best way. I'm saying it is the way that has gotten me as far as I have come. And I don't have contradictions in what I teach and what I think and what I believe, and I can back everything up. The quickest way to identify whether you have something wrong is to do expositional study, because it has to align across the entirety of the Bible without contradiction. And so my studies do that. I don't know about everybody else's. I don't care. That's not my problem. But this is why, once you start getting in the habit of doing expositional study, you come to expect that of others. And if they don't do that, it's very difficult to listen to. And this is where context comes in, is you're not just going to say a trumpet 100% of the time is an instrument. No, it's not. Exodus 19, there's a bunch of references. Exodus 19 is when Moses led the people to Sinai. And this was the instruction that God was giving them on that. Be prepared for the third day. On 6, they would go up and receive the law. God would descend in a cloud and meet with Israel to deliver the law. And he's giving them instructions here. There shall not an hand touch it, talking about Mount Sinai, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up to the mount. The trumpet sounding is not an instrument, it is the voice, the voices. And you'll learn that right here. When the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. The voice of the trumpets that were used to dispense the law on Sinai were actually the voices of angels. You learn this 3 places in the New Testament. And I'm actually going to, if you didn't know this, I'm going to show you. We'll come back to this. Acts 7:53. Galatians, I always forget what verse it is. I think it's 18. And Hebrews 2:1. The law. This is when Stephen was being stoned. He said, who have received the law by the disposition of angels and have not kept it. The voice of the trumpet that spoke the law to Israel was angels. It was not the voice of God. It was God spake by a voice. It was not his own voice. It was the law was given by angels. Nope, it's not Galatians 3:18. I'll find it in a second. Hebrews 2:1. Therefore, we ought to give more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Because, for if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, if the law given to Moses and the people on Sinai was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, then how much greater are you going to be held responsible for the things that Jesus himself spoke? How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him? I need to find that verse in Galatians 3. Right here, 19. I was one verse off. Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. So the law was spoken by angels on Sinai. If you guys didn't know that, it was spoken by angels. This is why there is a necessary distinction to make in the New Testament when you're talking about the Lord himself descending from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel and with the trump of God. Because his voice is described as a trumpet, as are angels in Revelation also, and historically in Exodus also. So there is a necessary distinction between the voice of the trumpet that is Jesus and the voice of the trumpet that are angels. Jesus is not sounding any of the trumpet judgments, and none of the angels which are sounding trumpet judgments are participating in the rapture of the church. Those two things are separate. So again, when we're looking at imagery, we need to understand whether it's a voice or an instrument, and what it's being used for. This is situationality. This is context. We cannot paint things with a broad brush. Now, Leviticus 23:24. This is actually talking about the Feast of Trumpets. Speak unto the children of Israel in the 7th month, and the 1st day of the month shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial, a blowing of trumpets, and holy convocation. A memorial. This is the one thing about the Feast of Trumpets that kind of blows my mind, and it's the blowing of trumpets. So that's kind of punny also. But it actually blows my mind. It's because people overlook the fact that the Feast of Trumpets was a memorial. That means a remembrance. That means that the event which it's memorializing already happened. Tishri 1 was day 1 of creation, where the voice of Jesus, which is the voice of the trumpet, began to speak creation into existence. It was written into the law to commemorate, to memorialize day 1 of creation, where the word spoke creation into existence. The word has the voice of a trumpet, and it is therefore memorialized or commemorated via the blowing of trumpets. So the significance of this is they used an actual trumpet, but it was to memorialize, to celebrate, to commemorate, to remember the voice of Jesus that spoke the worlds into existence. This was also a command to memorialize the voice of not even memorialize. This is not a memorial. This was to foreshadow the voice of Jesus. Yes, there was a command in the law to use an actual trumpet to blow on the 10th day of the 7th month in the Day of Atonement. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. But this was a foreshadow of the trump of God, Jesus, the voice of God, who would have an earthly ministry which started on the Day of Atonement. So this was something that was written into the law to foreshadow Jesus, who has the voice of the trumpet. And thus, there was a foreshadow with the trumpet. Numbers 10 is actually where I want to settle on the understanding of the different reasons why when you're not talking about a voice or a memorial to a voice or a foreshadow of a voice, which is what 100% of these references have been. So far, all we've been doing is talking about voices of trumpets, whether it's angels or Jesus, and whether it's remembering his voice sounded at creation or foreshadowing his voice for ministry in the New Testament when he came. 100% of the references to trumpet up to Leviticus 25:9 are talking about voices. Numbers 10 is actually the first time where you come to a passage where it talks about an actual instrument that's being used to facilitate some kind of action for Israel that is not associated with a voice. And so Numbers 10 is actually where we're going to pull the reference material for understanding the context of sounding an actual instrument for the purpose of sharing information with Israel, whether it's to warn them or to gather them. There were two uses for an instrument, and Numbers 10 is where we're actually going to pull that from, and in Joel 2, we're going to see that both of those situations actually apply. So Numbers 10:2, make 2 trumpets of silver, of a whole piece shalt thou make them, that thou mayest use them for the calling of the assembly and for the journeying of the camps. Well, when we go to Joel 2, that's actually the second reference, is to call an assembly. So one of the uses of an actual trumpet instrument being sounded in Joel 2 is literally going to be used to call a solemn assembly, to call an assembly. And that's what Numbers 10:2 tells us, is one of the uses for the trumpets is the calling of the assembly and for the journeying of the camps. The journeying of the camps is a separate clause. It's not for the calling of the assembly for the purpose of journeying. It could be both. So in Joel 2, it's actually for the calling of the assembly. So let's continue reading these verses. And if they blow but one trumpet, then the princes which are the head of thousands shall gather themselves unto thee. The sons of Aaron the priest shall blow the trumpets, and they shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. Numbers 10:9. And if ye go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresseth you, then ye shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and ye shall be remembered before the Lord your God, and ye shall be saved from your enemies. And here is the other reference in Joel 2, is you're going to sound an alarm because war. If you go to war in your land, you shall blow an alarm with the trumpets. And that's actually what this first reference is. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. This is the day of the Lord. War is going to come. Jesus is in the midst of gathering people to Armageddon. They're going to tread over the people and the city, and he's going to come back and physically save Israel and destroy those armies at Armageddon, which is what Joel 3 is actually leading up to. Joel 3 is judgment in the valley of decision. It's judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which are synonymous terms with Armageddon. So what you have here in Joel 2 is the situationality of when they would have historically in Israel, per Numbers 10, sounded literal physical instruments, trumpets. And one was an alarm because war, and the other was to call an assembly. You have both of those here, and neither one of them relates to anything to do with the church or the rapture of the church. You're talking about Israel and the end of the end days at the literally like on the day of the second coming of Jesus Christ is what we're talking about in the context here. So I'm going to end this video here, but I wanted to spend some time clarifying context and why it's so important to not paint these things with a broad brush. When the trumpet is a topic of conversation, you need super discernment abilities. It shouldn't be that way because we should be able to read situationality and context into these things, but it seems like there is a failure to be able to distinguish literal meaning versus figurative meaning and when those would be appropriate. And whether you're talking about past, present, or future, whether you're talking about a foreshadow of something related to Jesus, or you're talking about angels versus Jesus, it seems like this concept, this topic of trumpets, is something that people don't look deeply enough into, and it causes a lot of people to get a lot of things wrong. And so I'm hoping that this video has been helpful and to give people an opportunity to investigate things further than just surface meaning, to understand concepts that are super important. And if we want to understand prophecy, we need to understand context. Context, context, context. And the trumpet is appropriate to study, and it is applicable to Joel 2. So I'm doing this separate video to talk about this. And when next we meet, I will actually start going through Joel 2. Having said that, I will wish you guys a good day. I'll see you later.